The opinions and concerns expressed in on-air discussions are those of the participant, and do not necessarily reflect those of Freethink Radio or other participants of Freethink Radio.
Free Think Radio.
Freethink Radio.
This is the independent internet radio station. freethinkradio.com.
Freethink Radio.
freethinkradio.com.
What you want? What you want? And this is a Truenorth show. It's 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Friday, February the 3rd, 2012. Today we have with us Ian Driscoll and Matthew Kurtz, the authors of a book called Atlantis, Egyptian Genesis. It is more of a study of the creation myths and Atlantis myths and how they're connected. So welcome, Ian. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you.
It's to be here.
Good stuff. So, give us a quick synopsis of the rundown, anyway.
Sure.
Of the book.
Yeah. All right. Well, basically, it's a comparative mythology work. We look at Atlantis specifically as described by Plato. In comparison to world creation mythologies. So it's not Atlantis in a general sense, as in a lost civilization. We look specifically at the characteristics given by Plato in the Timaeus and the Critias and compare the themes there to other worldwide creation mythologies, with a special emphasis on the myths of the temple at Edfu in Egypt.
I've always noticed that certain ancient cultures, for me, the creation myths I study this stuff myself, and the creation myths of pretty much all ancient cultures seem to have a common theme to it. The names and the dates changed to protect the innocent, whatever.
Right.
But certain cultures, such as the Egyptians or Sumerians even, just stick out, you know what I mean? And they more stand the test of time, because there's actual, like, as you mentioned, Plato himself is said to have gotten the information that he wrote down in the Critias from Egyptian sources.
Yeah.
So
And older Egyptian sources than conventional archaeology or history is willing to accept. 9,000 years before Plato's time is not something that conventional archaeology accepts into the timeline.
Well, and of course, I mean, in Herodotus, he records that the Egyptians thought that it was about 12,000 BC that their civilization was founded. The king lists obviously record enormous lengths of time that are much larger even than what Plato and Solon, were both talking about. So, but of course we think we know better, so we go with that.
Good stuff.
But even those Egyptian, the mystery schools and the priests of the mystery schools, they even spoke of extensive histories that, you know what I mean, went way back, like what we would compare Egypt today.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and when I say we think we know better, I mean, the modern sort of academic establishment thinks it knows better than the Egyptians did about their own history, and that's also the thing that Matt and I try to make clear in the introduction for the book, is basically that we do believe in the existence of a lost civilization. I mean, I don't know if you can honestly study comparative mythology for whatever it's been, 10, 15 years, and not come away with the idea that there was some kind of unifying factor that, I mean...
And even down to the details, right? Even down to the water. I'm reading your ebook, your Kindle book in the beginning. Or is that the full title of the full? Because you said it's going to be a 9-part deal. Or these all?
Yeah. You're right. Basically, so that's the full title for this installation, and there are going to be 9 different. I mean, for lack of a better term, we call them volumes. And it's basically making up a series called the Mythology of the World, and and that was just released today, actually. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, and you name off a ton of civilizations that have so many similarities in the creation myth, like the water coming from the water. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we got a chance to breeze through that last night, and that particular what Trev was about to say, it just really sparked mine, because that's more towards the theory that it was first conventional, Christian history would assume that land and water were made at the same time.
Right.
Like just like that. Snap your fingers, it was there.
Yeah.
But the ancients before that, most of them anyway, especially the myths I've studied, say that this whole planet was at one time water or liquid. You know what I mean? And then from that, which kind of relates to the scientific theory now, speaks to the primordial ooze or whatever, where life emerged from water and then came out onto the land. But that still doesn't explain the scientific theory anyway. It doesn't explain where the land came from.
No, certainly not. I mean, the scientific theory is I mean, in my opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, I think the scientific theory is going to be counted as one, particularly sad candidate of creation mythology in another 100 years. I think really part of the reason we're writing this series, and part of the reason we released this particular one in the beginning first, is because we believe that most of the creation stories are sort of, they sum up the rest of the mythology in each culture. I mean, they're sort of the whole point. And I don't really think you can even get closer to sort of the coming into existence of something that didn't exist previously than ancient mythology. It's
even though a lot of them seem to say that life somewhat sprang up from the water, they also kind of somewhat suggest that this isn't the first time this has happened. Like there was something there before the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cyclical timing seems to be a recurring factor worldwide from what we found. It's very interesting just because the creation process itself always seems to be an aftermath of a previous world, and it doesn't necessarily have a beginning nor an end.
That I was telling Trevor right before we started this. I forget. Tuck El Nui, I'm thinking that that's what the band was called, but it spent a lot of time on a reservation in the Okanagan Valley. when I was younger. And one of those guys told me that they believed that the world sits on the back of a turtle.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, the turtle decides to go and check out what's going on underneath the water. And the whole world dies. And then he eats whatever's at the bottom. And then he decides to come up and float on the surface for a while. And then the world has to re-emerge again.
Well,
until it gets to a certain point, and then he decides to go back down.
Yeah. It's actually funny that the Okanagan have always been very interesting to Matt and I, and actually they have an interesting myth we included in the beginning, where basically they pretty much retell the story of Atlantis again. They call it they say in the beginning there was a large island called Samatumi Wula, and it means the white man's island. And on it lived a race of white giants, and eventually there was a bunch of infighting, and she destroyed the island, and it went underneath the sea. But it's interesting that you find these same themes strewn throughout every world mythology. I mean, you have the giants, you have the myth of the island Earth, you have things like twins. So
Pillar Tree, Table of the Island.
Right, you even mentioned in the beginnings of a whole race of twins, like that we all started, and all the gods gave birth to twins. Like all the humans were twins.
Yeah.
Yeah, the I forget. I think Arizona, anyway, mentioned in the paper that I read last night that she was saved by grabbing onto the talon of a low-flying bird.
Right.
And she became his wife or whatever back at the nest, and she gave birth to twins that in turn repopulated the planet.
Yeah, exactly. There was the Brule Sioux, and they have. I mean, there are again, and these are all subjects, unfortunately, that really aren't covered, at least not to my satisfaction, in most comparative mythology texts. Like, if they come up with any kind of answer, it's always something to do with, the twins arose because they were fascinated with. Unfortunately, most of the answers these days come from sexuality. So all of the comparative mythology texts, the standard comparative mythology texts, talk about all of these myths deriving from some sort of
phallic,
from some sort of phallic fascination on the part of the ancients, and I just, I don't find that satisfactory. The twin birth is everywhere. I really have encountered very few civilizations that don't believe that in the golden age of mankind or the golden age of the gods that sort of predated, some period of destruction, there weren't twins. I mean, it was always twin births.
Yeah. Did you ever I've done a lot of study and comparison on the current astrological ages, zodiacal ages. And I noticed that during the time of, I always compare, like, at the time of Moses, he came down from the mountain, he was all mad because they were worshiping a cow or a bull or whatever.
Yes.
And he blew the ram's horn to signify the dawning of a new age, and that just happened to be at the exact time when
the age of
Taurus was moving into the age of Aries.
right, exactly.
And then when Jesus came or whatever, it just happened to be the exact time when he was moving into the age of Pisces.
Yep.
Jesus is often symbolized as a fish, whatever. But before that, which people aren't willing to accept that anything existed before that, was indeed the age of Gemini, and then before that, the age of Leo.
Yeah.
Which is about the time when the Sphinx was built.
Yeah, and that
it's said to represent Leo.
Exactly.
But the age of Gemini, there's very little history or evidence at all that anything was happening then, except this twin symbology.
During that part, I did notice a lot of references to twins, which could be put in the context of celestial events.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think.
Sorry to
Yeah.
cut you off.
No. Go ahead.
Multiple references to cosmic giants seem to be, planetary bodies, kind of. You could interpret it that way.
Yeah, or flying giants.
Well, and honestly, to take another crack at the celestial thing, what's interesting about the sort of the age of the giants is that the constellation of Orion, which of course, I mean, plays a huge a huge part in especially alternative mythology, or I should say alternative history these days with Bovall's Orion correlation theory and everything else. Orion is always in the ancient societies, Egypt, Sumeria, I mean, really everywhere. Greece, obviously. He is always associated with a giant, and in fact, he's associated with. Still there?
I'm here.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
My headset just went dead. All right. Anyway, he's associated with in a lot of senses the giants that were supposed to have sprung from sort of the descent of the angels and the interbreeding with women, the production of the Nephilim in the Jewish tradition. For instance, Nimrod, who is mentioned in the Bible several times as a famous king, he was supposed to have been a giant who survived the flood and then sort of instigated the construction of the Tower of Babel. And the Persians actually referred to Orion as Nimrod. So I mean, there's a lot of connection there too. So I mean, who knows, that may well be celestial, also.
There's giant symbolism associated with some of those cultures that you mentioned too. Like even to this, you remember the movie 300 when they showed the Persian?
Yeah,
I forget his name. Darius' son. I forget his name.
Yeah.
But he was huge. He was like 9 feet tall.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about Xerxes?
And that, you know what I mean? That's Hollywood getting that into your head without actually saying it.
Yeah. And
that's half of the point, I think, is that all of these things have trickled down through time to us, and we've manifested these same concepts with different outlets nowadays, and we've, I think, lost a lot of the original context with which they were constructed from.
Well, before the show, Nelson, we're talking, in the beginning, I'm trying to find, actually, the highlight, because I highlighted a bunch of stuff. But there's a reference to that, how is it? How that was done on purpose. Like, it says something about, I have walked the footprints of your emergence.
Like the gods saying outright, like,
sure,
I will make sure
the
you
Hopi
don't
mythology.
remember where you came from.
Hopi mythology. Yeah, he sinks the islands that were the evidence of their emergence, and he says, that they're at the bottom of the ocean now, but there will come a time much later when they will reemerge from the ocean and they will bear witness to the truth that you speak. That's that's actually, that's from the Book of the Hopi, and that's a particularly interesting set of mythology. Honestly, just amongst the Native Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the Hopi in particular have always been really fascinating to both of us. Go ahead, sorry, Matt.
No, not a problem. Frank Waters is amazing. That guy, as far as looking into any kind of Native American history or mythological creation story, they have so many coincidences that line up with these vast civilizations worldwide, and they come from a tribe based out of Arizona. It boggled both of our minds that they had all of this stuff succinctly. They basically say it straightforward. They don't have it wrapped in mythological constructs like most of these things do. They just come out and say, hey, there were flying machines, and these things flew through the air and started attacking other cities. And then there's a world war.
Like the Vedas.
Exactly, right.
Exactly.
Like not only brief descriptions, but blueprints and plans of how they built these things and everything else.
Right, the Vimanas, exactly.
Let's take it to the next level.
The Hopi are really, I mean, especially Matt and I both find that when you go back as far as you can, that's the most interesting mythology. The closer it gets to modern day, the more boring it is and more irrelevant. And the Hopi, when they're discussing their multiple destructions and subsequent emergences into new life, I mean they don't really pull any punches. I mean they're talking about the destruction of the earth through the misuse of vibratory centers, which is I mean just fucking insane. And it's all said pretty straightforward. Like I say, they don't beat around the bush. There's really no symbolism to decipher. They make it pretty clear.
But
see, even today, we're manipulating vibrational centers with
because of the conditioning of our schools and everything else, we just start studying. Say we find an ancient civilization, we start on the notion that all of it's symbolism before we even look at anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't even think, wow, these guys just wrote down what they seen. We just assume that, they must have meant this by this.
Yeah.
And when they said this, well, they must have meant this because the tribe down the road symbolized it that way. So these guys must have done it too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and honestly, I mean, I completely agree with you, and that's why I've never really found a convincing explanation from sort of orthodox anthropologists or comparative mythologists, regarding these myths. I mean, if you don't mind, I'll just read you a quick statement from Frank Waters' Book of the Hopi. He says, the connection between vibration and magnetic poles is clearly outlined in the Hopi mythology. They state that in the beginning, two deities created by God were charged with ordering creation. One of them was charged with tuning the entire world to the voice of God. The myth states that, quote, Palangawoya, which is the name, traveling through the earth, sounded out his call as he was bidden. All the vibratory centers along the earth's axis from pole to pole resounded his call. The whole earth trembled. The universe quivered in tune. Thus he made the whole world an instrument of sound, and sound an instrument for carrying messages, resounding praise to the creator of all. I mean, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, but like I said, conventional historians will shroud it in, or whatever.
Well, that's just a deep understanding of scientific knowledge. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like magnetosphere and stuff. So.
Yeah, that's. See, and the problem is that we're not willing to accept a culture that knew more than we did.
Right.
Because then that would crash the paradigm. That would make us believe that we weren't the pinnacle. We're not the apex so far.
Right.
It's hard to lose one's ego, That's, and I guess that's what has really happened, unfortunately, to most of this. And like what he actually just read from the book by Frank Waters, that's along the line of the acoustic research that we started doing, and finding that a lot of these things, actually, a lot of these sites, megalithic sites, purely, are acoustically designed.
Yeah.
And it's a new form of science that has only recently come out, and so they're just kind of breaking into this.
Mm-hmm.
They had no idea that all of these things could have even been developed in such a way, or that they even had the knowledge to be able to do so. But once again, as we go on, we keep finding that these ancients were smarter and smarter than we previously had thought they were.
Right, there's a fellow we have on the show frequently, Brian Forster, and he spends a lot of time in Peru, right? And we often see the holes drilled through the rock, and we're told those are telescopes of some type.
Yeah.
Apparently, they hold tune, do, re, mi.
Yes, I saw his videos, and I saw a few of his posts on Facebook. Actually, he's a great researcher. I think he's living in Paracas right now, but he discusses the idea of sort of using those holes, right, as sort of amplifying chambers to to speak into or to resonate a particular sound.
Right, that was in the Coricancha, right?
I don't know if it was in the Coricancha. I'm not sure, but I know he's sort of gone to every. I mean, he went to.
Yeah, he's been to every site.
Yeah.
Everywhere, man.
Yeah.
And he goes out into the desert, and like in Peru, I guess. Well, maybe you know, but there's places that nobody they've been walking by skeletons for hundreds of years, and nobody's even bothered looking. You know what I mean? Because he's got pictures on some of his albums where it's just bones scattered, ancient ones, just scattered, just not. You know what I mean?
There's a whole cemetery right near Nazca actually that is usually offered on most tour programs, where literally people can just walk through and pick up skulls. I mean it's nuts. Yeah.
Like in North America, that would be taped off, and some university be in there with travels. You know what I mean? You wouldn't be able to do. But the people, even more respect for the culture. They just say it's somebody dead. You don't fuck with it. You know what I mean? Just
exactly.
The crazy thing is, here we would find normal skulls. He's finding all sorts of different shaped skulls and everything else, right?
Oh yeah, he just wrote a new book.
Universities would be all over that, but they just simply aren't.
Yeah, actually, I wrote to him because it's very difficult to get books down here where I am, and I wrote to him, and he said he'd hold on to a copy for me. So I'm taking a trip out to Paracas and the Elongated Skulls Museum pretty soon, just to get my hands on it. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, back to Atlantis. This I don't know. It's a sense of a collective memory. You know what I mean? Like people seem to suffer the same phobias, the same, things that make people happy are always like a nice sunny day is nice for everybody. It's not just these are collective or a lot of scholars put forth the idea that these may well be collective memories, ingrained on the DNA. And not only that, there's also evidence through physical documents like maps and other such things that speak of a civilization, global civilization from eons and eons ago. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like way before even the glaciation of the last ice age.
Sure.
There's a book by he's old as hell. Charles Hapgood. Is his name. The Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. I refer to that book all the time.
Sure. Yeah, actually, I think Hancock covers. He opens Fingerprints of the Gods with that, right? With the Piri Rice map, or and a few others. Yeah, that are supposed to show Antarctica completely ice free.
Yeah, the Phineas map as well. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's a few of them though, and there's other places that show in the 60s, maps made long time ago, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before anybody could have possibly known what's under. Like Friesland. You ever heard of a place called Friesland?
No.
It's a mythical island off the coast of Ireland or whatever.
Okay.
And on old maps, 15th century maps and stuff, they show it, they depict it. Now, with satellite imagery from the 80s and 90s and on from there, we can see that indeed there is a huge landmass under the coast, off the coast of, but it's under the water. Mm-hmm. But 12,000 years ago, it wouldn't have been.
Right.
It would have been an actual island. And a lot of these map makers in the 14th century and before that didn't just go out and find these places. They just copied maps that they found that they knew were really old.
Right.
Because they understood that the older the shit was, the more they knew.
Right, exactly. The truer it was, yeah.
Triangulation was more precise, and it seemed like they had better contour for the countries they were describing.
Like maps made with longitude 2,000 years ago, when we weren't supposed to figure that out until 1600s, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, honestly, there are so many tales too. Actually, we covered this in our upcoming little ancient technology installment here. There's so many tales of ancient navigation that really shouldn't exist. I mean, you know, one of my favorites is there was an oral tradition in, I believe it was Polynesia, and there was a famous mariner, a famous navigator there, and he made a long trip, and supposedly when he got back, he told stories of coming to a place that was completely locked with floating icebergs, you know, giant blocks of ice, and he came back with two men who were supposed to be exceedingly tall, pale white, and have shining eyes, who were supposed to have taught the Polynesians a number of secrets of civilization, which is, I mean, you know, there's tons of stuff like this. It's crazy.
Magellan, when he went, you know, the Straits of Magellan. One of his men, the diaries of his men were found on the boats, and it told a tale of finding one of these Patagonian giants,
right,
capturing the thing, and having to tie it to the mast of the ship to get it anywhere.
Jesus.
And the thing is supposed to be 9 feet tall, and this is documented. It could well be made up, but there's lots of things that just, a lot of the stuff in that journal makes the history books then.
Yeah.
As proven documented fact.
Sure.
But this one, this
doesn't.
story, well, this can't be fact, so we'll just
Right.
dismiss it. But the same book, the same source information. And we do that a lot in, we just dismiss, like,
even with Plato,
Michael
like,
Green calls it a knowledge filtration system. By the time it goes up to, it just, well, we don't need this, and this sounds good. And as long as you base your thesis on this, you'll get a good mark.
Even with Plato, right, where we take into account all of his work, and then Atlantis is total myth.
Yeah, everything else Plato wrote is dead on fact, but Atlantis, that's the only fiction he wrote.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, you know, I think a lot of scholars look at Atlantis as some kind of allegorical story describing, you know, the dangers of pride, or you know, something like this. And really, I mean, that works until you read the fucking story. I mean, you know, when you're confronted with figures and measurements that are, I mean, unbelievably precise, and I mean, you really have to read it to get a sense of it. It's clearly not just an allegory, you know, a moral allegory. You don't need that kind of detail.
Well, there is the reference that I thought was interesting to a situation similar to what we're in now with global elite, kind of a ruling class that are abusing their power, right? And they were wiped clean off the earth,
right?
And the good got to stay, or whatever. You mentioned that in your in the beginning book.
Yeah. Actually, that's, you know, it's to go back to Edfu, which I think is a pretty good candidate in terms of Egyptian mythology. You know, if Plato was being sincere, if he was telling the truth that Solon actually got this information from Egypt, I think Edfu is probably one of the best candidates. The stories, anyway, recorded at Edfu. So basically, Matt, you want to tell the story? I feel like I've been talking way too damn much.
Not at all. It's a long one. It's what's interesting about Edfu, and I think why we both gravitated towards it more than less, is due to the fact that this was a late kingdom temple. This was a Ptolemaic temple, and however, it seemed to predate conceptually everything else in Egypt. Most of Egypt comes from different classes of thought. No one ever had a sense of being able to tie all of these different concepts together in one canon for Egypt. That's why there's so many different interpretations of these lists of gods and what they had done and where they were set. But Edfu seems to predate that, talk about what happened before any of that, and it seems to do it very concisely, and it's kind of odd in that idea. But what you have is it's very abstract, and getting through this book is pretty interesting, but it gave us a lot of insight. What you have is a creator deity making an island, raising a pillar in which a falcon alights on, so the first conception of a Horus type entity. And this pillar, eventually in the center of the island, in some way or another, becomes what they refer to as the sound eye, which I guess illumines the island. And at some point, dragon comes, so something akin to Apophis, not necessarily named Apophis, but comes and tries to take down the Sound Eye, and subsequently the Sound Eye falls, the island gets destroyed, and gets submerged beneath the waves. These two founders come later, and there's no period of time given. There's no mention.
It just seems to be like a really, really long, I mean, eons of time, is sort of hinted at, but, there are no specifics really provided.
Exactly. And they're named the Shebtu. And they find this place where the island had previously been and is now submerged. And they recreate the island. They raise it up again out of the waters with these relics that they refer to as the It relics. And they're basically substance, they're translated as substances of power or something akin to that concept. So they never really tell you anything more than that. Once again, it's very abstract. But funny thing is, in Egypt or in Japan, they have something called the ebb and flow crystals or jewels, and these things do exactly the same thing. They're able to raise land out of the ocean or submerge it again beneath the waves.
Yeah.
So it's playing off the same concept, but they raised this island a second time and refound it, and then they make other islands on the borders of this island, making the idea that there are subsequent smaller islands around this main central one. And it gives you, once again, something of the idea that Plato gives with the ringed islands. And as we have in Atlantis, Egyptian Genesis, we have what we view the paylands is what they term them around the islands to be able to create this larger structure. And it's just very odd that you never hear anything like that anywhere else in Egypt. More than this, it's terming all these ideas about the gods and more or less spells to be able to call the gods down or, to use them to their own benefit. This gives more of a straightforward idea of, hey, there was a civilization before us, and this is how it went down.
Yeah, just to sort of add to that, I mean, I think that's what makes. That's why we were fascinated with the Edfu mythology. That's what makes it so unique, is the fact that it sort of takes it out of a mythological context and more or less reads like an historical document. I mean, it's sort of like, it's basically summing up the Atlantis myth. I mean, a god creates a mound in the center. It's inhabited, and then it's destroyed by an attacking serpent and inundated with a flood. And this mound had a pillar in the center and was surrounded by other islands. And I mean, so if Solon really did derive any of his information from Egypt, like Plato says, then this seems as good a candidate as any.
Right, and I think you make reference to even Egypt being the knowledge keepers of that time, too, which would make a lot of sense with the structures we've found there, you know what I mean, and the amount of knowledge we've uncovered from Egypt, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's actually an interesting quote by a man named Schwaller de Lubitsch. He's a French mathematician and philosopher. I think he was Alsatian, but anyway. He was actually the guy who gave John Anthony West the idea that the Sphinx was probably water weathered and not weathered by the air. Anyway, he's got an interesting quote, and basically, I can't find it right now, but paraphrasing, he says that the role of the Ptolemaic period, which is what Edfu dates to, is sort of the opening of the doors to the Egyptian mysteries to the rest of the world. It was sort of the translation period between Egyptian thought and Greek thought, and so it was kind of this way of transmitting ancient knowledge to the modern world, which is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Schwaller de Lubitsch, on a side note, seems to have grasped Egypt more fundamentally than any other interpreter that I've come across. He understood the foundation of what the Egyptians were doing by their gods not being actual gods in which you should worship, but they were principles. And they actually conveyed information if you can understand what they're trying to tell you. And it was just laws of nature more than anything else. And that's what the Egyptians had to teach them. because as you had previously mentioned, we do a lot of interpretation and modern interpretation of these things, but these people had nothing more than the nature they had around them to teach them. And so they were much more succinctly tied into that. And they understood these principles and were able to put it into a system to be able to paraphrase it and teach others.
Yeah.
And that's
They
what he
seem
goes
to have. They seem to have an in-depth knowledge right down to even subatomic scale too, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, especially the work of Laird Scranton comparing the Dogon mythology to the Egyptian mythology is very interesting in that regard. I mean, he really does a convincing job of sort of looking at the symbolism of the Dogon myths and looking at the symbolism of the Egyptian hieroglyphs and the Egyptian mythology, and then comparing that and their creation stories to modern science. I mean, cutting edge modern scientific theories about how the world was created, more or less. So I mean, it's really incredible.
Have you ever checked out any of Nassim Haramehn's work on the Flower of Life or anything like that?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name. What was it?
Nassim Haramein?
Oh no, actually.
Oh, I highly recommend his stuff. He's a smart.
He's a quantum physicist or something.
Oh. Okay.
He really, I highly recommend his work to everybody.
Okay.
Especially when he gets into talking about the symbologies of like the Flower of Life, for example, being the tetrahedron and
the Earth grid. Like he takes number. He's a mathematician, right? So everything in his head works in numbers.
Yeah.
But he's a relative person. Like he seems like the guy down the block. You know what I mean? You can relate to him, and he can put it in a way where it makes sense. You don't have to be a scientist, pocket protector guy to understand it.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Actually, that's
it's really
very
good.
interesting.
And he does a lot of relating it to the ancients too. So, and your research, he's kind of a cool guy to check out to relate the modern to the old sort of deal.
Interesting. Yeah, I tend to like the idea of sort of comparing. For instance, I mean, Laird Scranton, he, like I mentioned, he does a lot of work comparing the Dogon symbolism and the Egyptian symbolism to modern, quantum physics and that sort of thing. And I think it's great. The only thing that I always come away with is I still feel that no matter where we get to, simply because how I'd phrase it is simply because of their sort of spiritual understanding of the world around them, and it's an understanding that I think we've completely lost as a modern society. We're never really going to catch up. So it's almost like it's almost like drawing down the moon. You're sort of if you picture the ancients as sort of the celestial and we're the terrestrial, we're trying to relate theories that are heads and shoulders above our own to our own theories, and sometimes I think we get carried away with that. But I'll definitely have to check out this guy because that sounds very interesting.
Right, I agree with Ian entirely on that. That's the quote that was supposed to be made by Newton was, if it appears that I am able to see beyond most people, it's because I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. That whole deal. And that man was, he is still highly held as one of the founding people in science. And what he was gathering was information from these ancient societies. And he did a lot of study in that. Most people don't like to talk about it, and that's when he went into more of an alchemist part of his research. But all of this stuff does tie in, and it's one of those things like you had mentioned previously. We seem to filter these things out, and it's kind of what we want to talk about nowadays, not necessarily how these people came to these conclusions.
Yeah, that's I always bring up the work of Pierre and Marie Curie. Who won a Nobel Prize for their work in radium or whatever. They both died of cancer, but
right.
Stevie Wonder seen that coming. But anyway, the bulk of their work, and I'm talking 90% of all their work, Nobel scientists, was in paranormal research. They want, you know what I mean? They wanted to figure out the realness. Like, how did some people make objects move without touching them?
Right.
There seems to be an exerted.
Their work.
There seems to be an exerted effort to separate that from science at one point.
I mean, I think.
But you never heard that mentioned in your grade 9 history. That's what I was saying.
Right, exactly. I think it goes to exactly what you guys were mentioning earlier. This idea of sort of a selective filter applied to all of our knowledge. I mean, there have been a few books mentioned or written now on Newton and his work with alchemy, and the fact that after his death, there was actually a conspiracy to keep his alchemical interests, which I mean really did make up a large part of his life, a complete secret from the public, because they felt that was just a discredit to modern science. They wanted sort of their pure, savior figure.
Same with Tesla, right? Nikola Tesla.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, they wanted to keep him under wraps.
Yeah, definitely.
You didn't even know his name when he was alive.
No.
But you knew Westinghouse's name, I'll tell you that.
And Edison. But yeah, no, I do think I think that ties into this idea that there's a selective filter. There's a filter applied to all of our knowledge, and those things that don't fit. I mean, it's sort of like UParts, the idea of out of place artifacts. Things that don't fit, well, they don't exist, for all intents and purposes. So, yeah. But.
See, that's what I hate. See, because I'm an evidence guy. I don't claim to have any answers. I just got a lot of questions.
Right.
But when there's, like, say, I don't know, giants, for instance.
Right.
Well, if there was giants, then there would be a lot of evidence. Well, there is.
Yeah.
It's in your face. You just refuse to take it into account.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think we're just sort of conditioned to sort of erase certain pieces of evidence, certain parts of our knowledge, in order to make them fit, the dominant theory of the time. And the sad thing is, and history bears this out, the dominant theory gets swept away in 100 years. And I think you actually mentioned this in one of your posts on Facebook, and I think it's a great quote. Some people are looking for truth, and some people are looking for something to believe.
Exactly.
And I guess I think it just comes down to a personal choice of which side of that fence are you on.
See, it goes the same way with science. It's like science is like a sport where there's a goal to achieve.
Right.
Science is supposed to be question. What happens if I do this?
Right.
Well, what about this? You
right.
know what I mean? That's supposed to be science. There's not this is science. Science proved it, so that's where we stop.
Yeah. Well,
that's not supposed to be science.
I was listening to an interview with Graham Hancock a long time ago. I forget when, but he was talking. He was on Coast to Coast, and he mentioned the fact that most archaeological sites, and of course, this is where we derive all of our theories from the past, about the past. Most archaeological sites have only really been explored maybe about 2-3%. I mean, and from that we've determined everything that has ever happened in human civilization, and it's it's mind blowing.
And I posted an article yesterday about that, about like scientists in Britain, when they find a site, they have 2 years. You come up with everything you can come up with in 2 years, and then we'll write the history.
And then we're done. Yeah.
Because we're building our subdivision after that, no matter what you find.
Right. Exactly.
And oftentimes, you see. Oh, I forgot my thought.
Sorry for cutting you off.
Well, hey, I want to jump in because you're listening to freethinkradio.com. This is a Truenorth show, and we got Ian Driscoll and Matt Kurtz here, writers of Atlantis, Genesis, Egyptian Genesis, and In the Beginning, which you can get for the Kindle. And they're going to have 9 parts. They're going to have other parts with different titles, but all sort of along the same theme. Mm-hmm. I did have another question. I was just looking at one of my highlights here. I found one part interesting. It just kind of popped out at me. you talk about the Nordic races, we find that the universe can be generally divided into three parts, and the word is what interests me is Nephelheim, the underworld.
Right. Right.
Yeah, the underworld.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of well, I mean the word is interesting actually just because of the pronunciation. The connection to, and of course, linguists
It's the
balk at this,
Nephilim, right? Like
exactly,
so.
right, but yeah, you connect it to the Nephilim or the Nephilim exactly, and it's interesting actually biblically. There's a lot of subterranean connection to the idea of the Nephilim. There was a race descended from them called the Rephaim, and they were supposed to be sort of they played a part similar to the Anunnaki in Sumerian literature, the idea of sort of subterranean judges, subterranean council, and so yeah, I mean that is very interesting. That's a good point you make.
Right. Just less of what you were just speaking about. You have the Irish who had their gods that had the term of Sede, and the term Sede meant God, but it was also translated as underground dwelling, or underground dwelling people.
Yeah.
And so the name for God itself meant that. Yeah, you have a lot of that all over the world. Once again,
there's a lot of. I heard a North American legend about we actually emerged from the caves, from underground.
Sure.
And there was two people. There was a people with two hearts and a people with one heart. And the people with two hearts tried to kill us off or something.
Mm-hmm.
So we ran out and lived on the earth. And the people with two hearts are still in the ground somewhere. And as long as we don't go down there, they won't kill us.
Yeah, I think that's. I think actually they relate that to the Hopi. I think they attribute that to the Hopi. I'm not sure, but I do know that the Hopi mythology basically states that in one of their destructions, they're commanded, the good people who are left on Earth, sort of the remnant, if you want to use a biblical term, are commanded to go underneath the ground while the god upstairs destroys everything else. And they say, go underneath the ground. Okay, we'll do that. But what's interesting is they meet a subterranean race called the Ant People, and these people are supposed to have eyes that sort of refract the light so that they can see with very minimal illumination. I mean, it's insane. But it's one of those worldwide pieces of mythology that no one deals with.
Yeah, because it doesn't connect.
Right.
There's also, there's been, you brought up Uparts before, and obviously Sumerian and Egyptian just keep coming up no matter what cultural reference you're referring to, which I find weird in itself. But just Sumerian and Egyptian alone, in North America, apparently, there's been many things found that are just completely covered up, apparently. Like there's that whole Grand Canyon thing.
About, that Childress writes about that. Yeah, right.
And then there's a Niagara Falls thing where apparently a sarcophagus was actually found. Egyptian sarcophagus was found underneath the falls.
Right.
Because they've turned them falls off on the American side a couple times.
Right.
They can just turn them off somehow. I don't understand it, but there's pictures. Like it was as early as the 70s they did it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and there's a guy named Chief Joseph in the Western States, and he was really smart, done a lot of writing. Anyway, when he died, in his hip pack or whatever they called it, they found a Sumerian cuneiform tablet. Now, it's quite possible that some European brought it and gave it to him. But, like, the things that he said in his writings and stuff match up to ancient, wisdom or whatever. So where the fuck he got that tablet is beyond anybody.
Yeah.
But people just don't mention it. You know what I mean? That just never comes up. Because it was never written down in the history books, so it's not true.
Yeah, I mean, and another perfect example is in Brazil. There was this stela that was found, and and it was in Phoenician, and it was translated by the director of the National Museum in Rio de Janeiro, and it reads something like, "We're sons of Canaan. We came from Phoenicia, a distant land with mountains. We came here. We were separated by a storm. Hopefully the gods will look favorably upon us," or something. I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much the gist. And this exists. This was translated by a man, a reputable man in his field, and no one pays attention. Fuck it, it doesn't fit.
Yeah. There's also the rune stone. Oh, I forget what it's called. Kensington rune stone.
Right.
Which is, European writing. Well, could be described as European writing.
Mm-hmm.
There's been Roman swords and flag holders,
right,
that they found in North America. Roman ones, like with the eagle, like undeniably Roman.
Right.
Yeah. Of course, all these things could have been hoaxed, so they were.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Every single one.
How it
yeah. Right.
Why not side with the reason of doubt? I mean, transatlantic contact is something that the more you look into seems more and more undeniable. I believe it was Ramses that had cocaine found in his
cocaine mummies.
Yeah. It's like, wow, where did that come from? Let's think about this real quick. and they still don't like to bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
There was a test done on 600 Egyptian mummies throughout 1,000 years by the girl.
Yeah.
That hangs with Zahid. You know the one I'm talking about. She's on
that.
She done the test, and she in 80% of these mummies throughout 1,000 years, elites and non-elites, they found cocaine and nicotine in 80% of them.
Right.
So it wasn't only just an elite thing that they got sometimes.
Yeah.
It was a common thing to have cocaine in Egypt.
And I mean, if it's over 1,000 years, it wasn't just one trip. I mean, clearly that the line of communication was fucking open.
And there was opium coming from China and Afghanistan at the same time.
Yeah.
No. Also, at the same time, monoatomic elements like gold and silver.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of... You ever seen Jim Mars's presentation on the monoatomic white powder?
I've never seen his presentation. I've read some reports on it, but
he links some shit. And you think of Jim Mars, you think politics, Kennedy assassination, you know what I mean? But this guy can get deep, boy.
Yeah. I'll have to check.
But take everything with a grain of salt, right?
No, of course. I mean, I think we were talking about this the other day with Sitchin. I mean, the idea, I mean,
I understand his elevation. You put him on a pedestal because a lot of his work does seem to prove a lot of points. You know what I mean? But we gotta understand.
My problem is you have to exercise critical thinking. I mean, if for instance, I mean, you see this all the time. I mean, I'm sure anyone active on Facebook would see this all the time. You see posts from various people. I've especially been noticing in the last few days. There's one post I just saw last night of some quote attributed to Kennedy saying that there's a plot in this country to enslave every man, woman, and child, and before I leave office, I will expose the plot. Right? And the attribution is Kennedy 7 days before he was shot. And it's bullshit. But people, I mean, and it really doesn't take much more than about, 10 seconds of checking into this. But people don't look for sources, unfortunately, anymore. And if we stop asking questions on our side, again, it comes down to belief versus truth. But if we stop asking questions on our side, then we're no better than the academics who don't ask questions on their side. You know what I mean? So
there you go. It boils down more to a hero worship sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like we base our own research on the research of others instead of reading. Just you mean Stitchin said it?
Right.
Well, then it's truer than if the guy down the block said it. Like I don't need to read anything if Stitchin said it.
I mean, I can pretty much speak for Ian on this one. We try and find as many source texts as possible because anybody who has also gotten their hands on those seem to more than less, from what we've found, kind of misconstrue like some of that information. And so you have to get back to the original text that the people you're studying actually made mention of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
like,
that's
the guy
that's,
that I. Sorry.
No, not a problem.
The guy that I bring up is. Don't get me wrong, because I like a lot of his work.
Yeah.
But Klaus Donna, we've had him on the show.
Right.
The cases that he has and the relics that he has, the artifacts that he has are incredible.
Amazing.
They really
true.
are. And he's got doctors and archaeologists to back him up and whatever. But then that's it.
Yeah.
These are the only things that you ever see. These particular doctors and these particular archaeologists backing it up.
And
nobody else has ever even been to these sites. You know what I mean? Nobody
right.
else ever wrote a paper. Nobody else. It just seems weird. That's all.
I don't have a problem with amazing claims, and I'm not even one. I think the old adage of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I don't think so, but they require the same amount of evidence as every other damn claim. And so Klaus Donna, I really am hoping. I wrote to him, and hopefully I get a response. But I'm really hoping that his claims are verifiable. But the problem is, all I've seen, for instance, his find supposedly of giant skeletons, which would be just unbelievable if it's true. But all I've seen are basically his words, and I'd like to hear someone else speak on this topic. It's not that I don't trust him. It's just that I don't think one man's word, when we're talking about the history of mankind, no matter who that particular man is, I don't think one man's word is good enough.
See, that does matter who the man is, because he does awesome presentations, man. He's got a lot of stuff and I've backed him up and everything else, but he's done a lot more than I have. Okay, so I appreciate his work, but like I said, for us, we can't just accept something,
right?
Because we want to believe something. It's not necessarily truth because we want to believe it, and it mixes in with our own philosophy or whatever.
Right, exactly.
As researchers, we're supposed to be
impartial,
not accepting.
That's the funny thing that I've found about going through a lot of these source texts is that they're actually just as fascinating as a lot of the major claims that sound ludicrous sometimes. Right. You just have to sleuth through them. That's the problem, and most people don't have the patience to do so.
Right. Actually, speaking of that, there's a gentleman, I don't know if you're familiar with his work. His name's Christian O'Brien, and he wrote two books, one called The Genius of the Few and one called The Shining Ones. And basically, he gets his hands on foundation tablets found at the Kur, the mountain house in ancient Iraq, and he translates these tablets. And the story that they tell are very interesting. They're similar to Christian or to Sitchin stuff, but no spacemen, basically. Basically, it's actually reminiscent in a lot of ways of the Edfu text, the mythology at Edfu. It's this idea of a settlement of the gods that is referred to as Eden, and sort of the eventual downfall of the society and its destruction by a flood. And it's actually really interesting. I'm in touch with a few linguists right now to try and verify his translations. But it's not out there. It's not quite so sensational, let's say, as aliens descending to Earth. But it's really fucking interesting nonetheless. So Yeah.
See, that's the thing about and I appreciate people like you. There seems like in the last 10 years to be a new wave of interest in this sort of at the turn of the century. There was lots of people.
Right.
Or even the last couple of centuries. But this particular century, there was really nobody. We just seemed to stick at, after, say, Donnelly, there was nobody interested in finding out anything. Sort of, we just stick to what we know and go from there.
Yeah.
Instead of finding out new things.
Right.
So now, last 10 years, people like Hancock, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
There seems to be a renewed interest in maybe this is bullshit.
Right.
Science seems to do that, like
And
Renaissance periods where we just give up the old adages and start from scratch.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that that's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Because even the things we see on a daily basis seem to defy what we were taught. Like, I grew up in a different world, and that was 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It seems like just like it used to be that what happened 50 years ago is still pretty much happening today. In this country, after the First World War in 1973, there was no inflation.
Right.
There simply wasn't any inflation in like 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, how does that work? Like, inflation now is just a way of life. Like,
well, honestly, I mean, I think that has to do with, in part, taking us off the fucking gold standard. I mean, when you don't when we're just talking about a group of guys who can print money and invent wealth, then yeah, inflation is the name of the game. I mean, shit, that's the only way they stay in power.
Right.
and that's the other thing too, because that elite that have the control to just pretty much run the world, because the world is run by money, or that's how we see things. They, through their organizations or whatever, do indeed link themselves to the elite, spanning back, all the way back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not only as far as we go, but all the way back to the gods.
Right.
And that's what gives them the godly right to do the things that they do.
Yeah.
What is it called? The right
divine.
of kings.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the divine right.
Yeah.
Because they honestly believe, whether they believe it's aliens or gods or lizard people or whatever, that's all speculation. You know what I mean? But there is proof that they do believe and teach their children through generations and generations. And the people that run this country and the States and anywhere that's considered the rest of the world, look up Burke's Peerage. These people are indeed the same people.
Oh, yeah.
They're indeed the same families, whether they're black or white or Chinese now, whatever.
Absolutely.
They're indeed the same bloodline.
The same blood,
yeah. Everything to them.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
I mean, the big story. What was it? The big story in 2004 of in the 2004 American presidential election was that Kerry and Bush were second cousins or some damn thing.
And they were both related to Cheney too.
Yeah,
and blah, 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 went on from there.
Exactly. I mean, it's a fucking joke. I mean, we keep getting played. Unfortunately, I was just talking to a few people earlier today, and we were talking about sort of the prospects of this upcoming presidential election. I mean, right now you've got Romney and Gingrich on the Republican side, because unfortunately Paul is too fucking honest to ever get a fair shake. And and on the other side you've got Obama, who turned out to be a huge piece of shit. And I really don't remember the last time, and I haven't met anyone who remembers the last time, that we weren't faced with a choice between two pieces of shit. One with a blue tie and one with a red tie, but the fact is we're being controlled by the exact same entities.
Right.
No matter who you vote for, the government wins every time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and to actually represent their citizens, that seems even more far-fetched than having a third party.
Right. Yeah.
That's the problem.
I don't know. I always hearken it. I'm a historian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I base everything on what happened before.
Right.
And it's never happened before. No matter how honest we thought they were before we elected them, it's never gotten any better.
Right.
Like, there's certain politicians where you can cite, like even Kennedy. Like, this is what people seem to forget too. Like, the people that get killed by the powers that be, the NWO, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Like, say Michael Jackson or Jack Kennedy.
Sure.
As soon as they get killed, all of a sudden they're heroes.
Oh yeah,
they
exactly.
were on our side.
Right.
We forget who they were before they got killed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We don't remember fucking crusades against communism. We don't remember
Exactly.
That. We don't remember McCarthyism.
Right.
That's Kennedy.
The Bay of fucking Pigs.
Yeah, you don't remember the Bay of fucking Pigs? He was ready to fucking blow shit up.
Yeah, exactly.
Michael Jackson, you don't remember him paying off 6 or 7 families so he didn't have to go to court on child molestation charges? That's
always my. I mean, I'm really glad you're saying this because this is always my sort of pet peeve. I don't understand how lying about a person's history somehow does justice to their. I mean, you know, what's done is done. We need to face facts and be truthful about what they did right and what they did wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, if we
good and run with it, leave the bad.
Exactly. If we deify these people, we're just sort of operating off of fairy tales and not history. You know?
Yeah. No, I think the worst evidence I've ever seen of that so far is Sandusky and this whole Penn State deal. I don't know. I don't know what happened there. A man covered up a guy molesting tons of children, and people boo the commissioners for kicking him out of the college.
People rioted. I mean, people fucking rioted. I mean, and here's the thing. I know this is a little off topic, but this is something that's definitely true. I mean, this is sort of indicative of where our priorities lie. The fact is, a man who raped a kid and a man who covered up this other guy raping a kid, that we riot for. Occupy Wall Street? No, fuck it. Let it die.
Yeah. That's my point.
Yeah. It's even like, see, that's what I mean. And then act like it did something.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, Occupy Wall Street. We went down there with signs. There was hundreds of thousands of us. Mm-hmm. And then we all went home.
And then we went home and had some pizza.
Like, what? Like, so what? Like, I'm not impressed.
Right.
And that, see, this is what pissed me and Trevor off. They throw up this picture a couple of days ago about Egypt's fucking protesting again. They're rioting again, blah, blah, blah. Here's a picture of 100,000 of them to Tahrir Square. My friend Antoine throws up a picture the next day because her museum's opening or whatever, but they couldn't open yesterday because of a celebration they were having for the anniversary of the protest from last year. They weren't having another protest. You know what I mean? They were having like an Independence Day party or whatever.
Right,
Egyptian flags flying all over the place. They're happy.
Yeah. Right.
But the truth movement grabs that shit, puts it up all over Facebook, and says, look, they're rioting again. We got to support Israel. They're gone now. It was a party.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The museum's open. Go check it out.
Right.
Like,
yeah, exactly. No, I know. I mean, and
we cling to these things because we want other people to. We're too afraid to do it ourselves.
Yeah, so we want to see it happen in the world first. Yeah. So, well, no,
it's like
mean,
lemmings. You jump first. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think
we're sitting on a cliff.
I think it's indicative of the control that the media exerts over the American people too, because I mean, be it, and really that you know extends to alternative media sources like Facebook. I mean, we see one picture, we see one video, could be completely out of context, but we just trust that it's true because it's there, you know. Right. And you know, I was
Soundbite Nation.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I was talking to a couple of friends, and they were saying that you know. Pretty much these days in the American news media, there is the bullshit presidential election, and whoever you know won or lost on that fucking reality dancing show. I don't even know the name of it, but you know, I mean, it's a joke. It's and really you got to figure that that this has to come down and pretty soon, which is what we're all looking for, or at least me.
No, that's you know, I'm not gonna be. I'll be there for the come down though, and I think also. Well, I got nothing to lose, so.
We got to meet Graham Hancock several years back, and after mind-blowing information that he gave in a seminar, we step up to him and we basically talk about how no one really cares about this amazing different perspective of where humanity came from. Right, and we came to the conclusion that people would rather watch wrestling on TV than find out where humanity actually, you know, came from. Yeah. That should be something that happens to be in everybody. you don't just wake up in a different city, let's say Cincinnati tomorrow, and say, all right, well, I'm here, let's just keep moving. You got to know, how did I get here? What happened?
Right.
Yeah, that's a thing. Like, people just expect. Like, you ever heard of a comedian called Louis C.K.?
I love Louis C.K. Yeah, absolutely.
He has one skit, everything's amazing and nobody's happy. He says that,
Yeah.
like, if you're traveling on a plane, you should be amazed every second. He says,
Right.
people, I say, how was your flight? No, we had to wait on the tarmac for 20 minutes, and then they check their bags. And he's like, really? Then what happened? Did you experience the miracle that is human flight? You flew through the air in a chair?
Yeah.
And you're not just taken aback by that? You're bitching about my iPhone don't work on the plane? Like,
right. Yeah, I remember him saying, your life is like a Greek myth right now. You're sitting in a fucking chair in the sky.
eating grapes and shit.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're just expect that, and we're owed that.
Yeah.
We're humans. We owe you owe us everything because we are. Exactly. Like, where did that sense of
entitlement come
righteousness come from? Like, I don't know. That must have been. My parents are different. We grew up dirt poor on a rural farm, and as a skateboarder, and there's no concrete anywhere. It sucked. So you know what I mean? I appreciate these things. I didn't fly on a plane until I was 25 years old, had my own money to buy a ticket.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Like, and then I was like, oh my, and I was scared shitless. You know what I mean? I was like, God damn. It's a plane.
It gives you better perception on life, and I do appreciate that kind of mentality. And I think that's where a lot of, you were talking about 10 years ago, these things are coming to the forefront now. And I think people, not maybe as a whole, but there's a large portion of our society on this planet that are now questioning things, I think, more readily than ever before because of the readily available information that people take for granted.
Yeah. With the internet, I think that people, like, that's why, like, now, I never even got a high school diploma. And I never even learned how to use the internet until I was 30. I paid for it for 5 years, but because I just thought it was for kids to download music and shit. And then I caught my son listening to a song that I never heard, like, by a band that I really like, and I'm like, where'd you get this music? Because for me, getting music means going to record shops and digging through crates for a half hour until you find that 7-inch that only had 100 pressings or whatever.
Yeah.
Nowadays, man, you don't have to go to the library. You don't have to wait 2 weeks for Buddy to bring back that Hapgood book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's right there. Click, click, click. As soon as you know how to read and write, you can school yourself, and you can. My 10-year-old, see, Henry VIII was considered one of the smartest men on the planet at his time. Experienced the most in the world. He could do whatever he wanted. He had access to the finest schools. My 10-year-old knows more than he ever did.
Yep. Right.
Or he ever possibly could. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, like, I think though, you know what? I mean, my feeling on the internet, especially because I mean that's so often where we get most of our information these days, is that it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, unfortunately, I think part of the reason we as a race, we as individuals used to strive so fucking hard to get information is because it was difficult to obtain. Now it's just there, and so no one cares. It'll always be there. Fuck it. I can look it up on Wikipedia at some point. I don't really need to work too hard or memorize anything or remember anything or care. It's
or even know who wrote the Wikipedia page,
or even know who edited the fucking Wikipedia page. Exactly. Yeah.
You guys brought up earlier Graham Hancock, and he goes a lot into shamanism. And another part in your book, you talk of, especially in Japanese traditions, the fungus or perfume fruit to renew youth, acquire power of floating.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another reference to the location of the fungus of immortality.
Yeah.
That sounds like the magic mushroom to me.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Actually, that's one thing. I'm currently working on another book that's sort of centering around the Nephilim, the fall of the angels, and kind of what I perceive as a at least 5,000 or 6,000 year old breeding program with mankind, which is a little fucking out there, but surprisingly enough, there's evidence to substantiate it.
Oh yeah.
And and yeah, the idea of accessing these sort of parallel worlds, parallel dimensions, universes, whatever you want to say, via sacred plants is unbelievably interesting. I mean, because at that point, I mean, Matt and I have talked about this, thousands of times, and we both feel that at that point, what you're looking at is some sort of experiential knowledge of the mythological realm. You know what I mean?
Right.
At that point, it's not just some ancient record in a book. It's something that you can, tangibly experience today yourself, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, and the idea actually, Supernatural is a brilliant book. I'd try to recommend that to everyone. In it, he talks about a lot of different experiences that people have had, either in UFO abductions, so-called, or DMT trips, ayahuasca trips, what have you. And there are a lot of similarities and commonalities between those and ancient mythological stories, which is really fucking weird. I mean, so it's definitely something that we want to start looking into.
Yeah, the fact, like, just the sheer, like, ayahuasca in general, the fact that it's a combination, actually, of two different plants. It's not just one.
Right.
And people in the Amazon been doing this for shit since they've been writing anything down.
Yeah.
Thousands of years, anyway. So for them to have known that it wasn't just a trial and error thing. Bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Let's just combine two plants until we come up with one that does something.
Well,
that
yeah.
would have taken thousands of years in itself.
I mean, Jeremy Narby, I think, makes that point in what was it called? Oh God, I always forget the name of his book. The something serpent, I forget. And anyway, he discusses that idea, and Hancock mentions it too, and he basically says that the shamans maintain that they got this information from the plants themselves. So I mean, let's say you eat a mushroom, and whoever you happen to encounter in this psychedelic trip says, hey, by the way, combine these two plants. You know what I mean? And so obviously there's some kind of directed intelligence at work here, and that's I mean, that should be fascinating to everyone everywhere.
and it's funny that you mentioned that, because a lot of ancient culture, I'm talking really ancient, believe that.
Mm-hmm.
That even the plants, not just the animals, not just people, but even the plants are a consciousness.
Yeah.
Like they have, like, the spirits of the forest or whatever.
Which puts vegetarianism in a whole new way.
Relates to that in the Lord of the Rings with the talking trees and moving trees and whatever.
Yeah.
Like this connection to nature, not only through the animals but through the actual plants.
Right.
Also inspires a reverence for it. You know what I mean? Like a respect for it that we just don't have anymore. That connection has been just severed.
Yeah.
And we just see it as a tool. We just use it.
All of the cultures mentioned in your books have some reference to a tree of life or a tree of knowledge, or a flower of knowledge, or whatever.
Tree of all seeds, whatever. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and it's actually interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this, but all of the texts that are recorded, they're called the building texts, on the walls of the Temple of Edfu, were supposed to have been copied from this ancient book, which was given to Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, whatever, via this group of people called only the Sages. And what's interesting is throughout all of these sort of DMT experiences and these UFO abductions, you have all of these incidents of people being given books, people being given like spiritual records, and so clearly, I mean, clearly there's a connection there, between ancient religion and mythology and modern psychedelic trips. And I mean, Hancock, I give Hancock credit. I mean, he's got some balls for exploring that.
Yeah, right.
Seriously.
Well, yeah, that's true.
So.
No, it is a whole different ballgame. You know what I mean? You're playing with a whole sort of psychology, for the lack of a better term, I guess.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's an odd actually, just to mention one reference in Supernatural that was really of interest to me. He describes the experience of this guy that Rick Strassman is experimenting with. Rick Strassman, who's the author of DMT, the spirit molecule, and he gave him a controlled dose of DMT, and he says, and this is what the guy says. He meets this woman who's sitting next to him, and he says, then she stood up, walked up to my forehead, touched it, and warmed it up, and then used a sharp object to open up a panel in my right temple, releasing a tremendous amount of pressure. This made me feel much better than I'd felt before, even though I realized that I felt fine in the first place. Okay, so I mean that's a really weird story, but what's interesting is that this is also recorded in Egyptian myth. There's a story recorded in a book called A Myth and Symbol of Ancient Egypt by a guy named R.T. Rundle Clark, and he says Osiris has to wear the Atef crown, which is that big white crown that sort of looks like a bowling pin. And it says it heats up his head and causes it to swell, causing a lot of pain and discomfort. Re, or Ra, whatever, the sun god, then comes up and pokes his finger into the side of Osiris's head, letting out a ton of pressure and relieving his distress. So, I mean, there are these very strange similarities that clearly, don't just come out of the blue.
Right, and by no means have we deciphered them, but there's a lot of, you can find a lot of evidence of this sort of thing happening, like open surgery on the skull and drilling holes.
Oh yeah, I got a collection of pictures of open brain skulls that lived long after this totally cut square was taken out of their skulls.
Yeah.
And they lived for years and years after. You can tell because of the extent of bone mass on the cut marks.
Right.
So they do something about that. There's also depictions of surgery, heart surgery, brain surgery all over the world.
Artificial insemination.
Yeah, well,
and
just the mystery of the elongated skulls as well. I mean, it's why I'm looking forward to Brian Forster's book. Yeah, I mean, because that's the world over. So is cranial trepanning. What you were just talking about, the idea of sort of cutting out a hole in the skull. Really, I mean, things that are so specific. We mention in the book that there's I think there's a case to be made for what we would call the psychological interpretation of myth. The idea that yeah, maybe in every culture, everywhere, the snake could be associated with water because of the similarity of its movements. Okay, sure. That might just be a universal commonality and might be just, a coincidence. Whereas with things as specific, as detailed as things like, elongated skulls, tree panning, that story I just read from Hancock and R.T. Rundle Clark, there's no way this just originated on its own. It had to have been, disseminated from a common source. You know what I mean? So
that's why I say the similarities are too. But that's another thing we just ignore.
Yeah. Yeah, the similarities are everywhere, and there's way too many of them, and that's why we have 9 installments to come. Because I think more than less, that's what we're trying to summarize is those little idiosyncrasies that seem to reappear everywhere, but you have to just keep wading through this source text information, and then, oh wow, I've read this before elsewhere. Oh, this is on the other side of the globe, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And so things like the eye and how the eye seems to be an all embodiment of this technology slash psychological understanding that we can't even really portray.
Yeah.
And so you need a whole book to be able to try and show, hey, this is what everybody said about this, and try and kind of do a summary.
Another similarity I've always found, especially the last 10, 15 years, because it's even started to be accepted by mainstream sciences, is like we accepted pyramid building as something that the Egyptians did, and then other cultures did it because the Egyptians did.
Right.
But last, 20 years or so, we've started. No, thank you to Zahi Hawass, fuck him, but whatever. We've realized that pyramids were indeed built throughout the world for what seems to be the same fucking purposes, whatever those purposes may have been. But they're all astrologically aligned. They're all the same shape. They all seem to have the same sort of, like even the ones that aren't.
And they all seem to predate their. They all seem to predate their accepted ages too.
Right.
And what I was going to bring up though is, especially now, with the emergence of China as this superpower, a lot of shit is coming out of China.
Yes.
You can't believe anything you read out of China.
No.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's some things you can't deny. We have Google Earth now. Like, you just can't deny that they're there, and you can't deny that they're 100% symmetrically built pyramids.
Right. Well, I make a comparison, honestly, to it was sort of a similar situation when the Berlin Wall came down. Suddenly, you had this wealth of information from Soviet scientists who had the balls to pursue, various tracks of research that our scientists were sort of forbidden from. Just basically, washing out of the Soviet Union, flooding out, and so suddenly we have all these new pieces of information that we have to sort of fold into the existing paradigm, and I think eventually it just has to crumble under its own stupidity. It's just not working anymore.
Yeah. Something's got to give.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sooner or later.
One would hope.
And that's what it'll be too. It'll be a flood, and like you said before, that'll be a blessing and a curse. You know what I mean? Because as we've been taught in the past, doing that to people breeds imaginative thought, and the links that the connections that people come up with don't always make too much sense, because the connections themselves are based on a school of logic that is based on either faith or pure shit from the start.
Right.
Which they're not willing to accept before they start researching or whatever.
Yeah.
See, that's what I don't understand about a lot of researchers, especially, sorry if anybody's Christian.
No.
But they've already got it figured out. You already know what's going on. You know how everything got here, so why bother researching? The only thing you're doing is digging for evidence that might prove your already existing point somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Which of course you're gonna find with all the similarities of creation myths, as you guys so
you're gonna find it.
Point out, you're gonna find support for that because of the similarities worldwide. Whether no matter what, a lot of them you change the names, it's still kind of the same. You know what I mean?
Right.
And as for China, they're like, we're finding all these pyramids and stuff now, but it just, with their creation myths that you guys have connected to global creation myths from all over the world, it only serves to make sense that they, of course, would have pyramids. Why wouldn't they? Everybody else does, right?
Sure, right.
Yeah. they have the same flying serpents. They have the same, you know what I mean? Ships in the sky ships or whatever they call them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That is a common thing too. And there's like just weird examples too, oop arts and stuff coming out of China, like you ever heard of the Dropa stones?
Yeah, I have heard of them, but actually, I only read a blurb of them in a book once. Yeah, I mean, I know barely anything.
See, just like every other one, it's going to be sensationalized to a point of just non-believability to anybody who has critical thought. But that's not due to it not being true. It's just due to people not having just too lazy to dig through the information to see what's real and what's not. They do that. That's, I believe anyway, a disinformation campaign, like a tactic they use. They just load it up with bullshit, and then it's just too much bullshit to even bother being true. So people just dismiss it.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the unfortunate thing with Sitchin. I mean, I know I keep coming back to the man, but the fact is, you know, the thing that I was working on the other day, he keeps going back to the Anunnaki and connecting that to the fallen angels of Genesis. And the fact is, in the Sumerian texts, in terms of a direct relationship, there really isn't one. There are certain hints, but they have nothing to do with spacemen descending from the skies. And, you know, unfortunately, it's sensationalized to the point that, you know, you throw the baby out with the bathwater, and no one pays attention anymore. And in fact, there's valid research to be done here. So it's unfortunate.
And now, don't mean to put anybody down, but now that the man is dead, there's, from here on in, it's just speculative translations of other people's thoughts.
Right, exactly. And again, you know, you have that same situation of, you know, JFK and Michael Jackson. Just because he's dead doesn't make him a fucking saint.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, let's be honest. So, you know, it's unfortunate, and you know, I think as Matt pointed out, most times the truth is a lot more exciting than any kind of fiction that could ever be invented. So why don't we get to that and stop making up fairy tales for ourselves?
Yeah, that's our goal.
There seems to be a concerted effort to stop people from knowing the truth.
Yeah.
And it's not, and it is at a point now that it's just ignorance and people don't care anymore.
Right.
But there was a concerted effort throughout the last, I don't know, couple hundred years, I'd say, to stop people from asking these sorts of questions. Making it taboo, you know what I mean? You tinfoil hat. But don't get me wrong, they sensationalize people like Von Daniken.
Right.
You know what I mean? To give the whole science a bad name. And don't get me wrong, Von Daniken, I respect the guy. He's come up with some good shit. He's bared a lot of adversity. It must be hard to be called a lunatic for 40 years.
Well, it's not that hard if you're taking in millions of dollars into your bank account. I could deal with being called a lunatic.
Around the world, doing backstrokes like Scrooge McDuck. But you hear what I'm saying though? Like these are the front runners that'll put up in the media, and then they'll put on Giorgio Tugalusin because he has got crazy hair. But the guy's obviously crazy. Look at his hair. And that means all his information could be dismissed too. Right. And then even shows like Ancient Aliens and stuff. Ryan, Chris, all these guys. These are, you know what I mean. We've had them on the show.
They're sincere researchers, and unfortunately, because there's no other outlet, they're forced to appear on shit like Ancient Aliens, and it's like that.
Even History Network, and their History Network's just going to pick out the things that they say and edit them to make, them say whatever they want.
Absolutely.
They never done anything really bad, but they, you know what I mean? They just don't get to the meat and potatoes. They just, here's the hors d'oeuvres.
They take it out of context generally and leave it,
Well, and unfortunately, I mean, I think even a show like Ancient Aliens, as good as it is, I guess, to give air to some of these, sort of alternative theories about humanity's past, I mean, we're framing it in the context of ancient aliens, which immediately brings up Von Daniken and Sitchin, who have been sensationalized to death in the fucking media. And it's like, meanwhile you have Hancock, who was pretty much, what was there was a scandal in the late '90s about a BBC program that aired, which was pretty much just a hit piece on Hancock and Boval.
Yeah.
And the serious researchers just never really get any kind of airtime because they're too much of a threat, in my opinion.
Right, and even the ones that do, like we were saying with Ancient Aliens, there's a definite spin put on it, a bunch of CGI, I've talked to Brian many times, and the context it's put in, the extreme it's put in on Ancient Aliens on the History Channel,
sure,
is not the extreme he generally puts into context. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Like they'll let Brian say a piece, and then the narrator come on and just say, "Could it be extraterrestrial?" You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's definitely a sort of a twisted interpretation that goes on there. I've watched a few of the episodes, and the one with there was one I watched with Brian in it, and I mean, I've read his books, and they're not sensational. They're unorthodox, but they're not out of this world.
He asks the question as opposed to saying this is what it was, and it was alien. You know what I mean? He'll ask, like, who were these people? Like, why were they so different? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's a valid question to ask, and unfortunately, it just gets framed in this context of Ancient Aliens, which is, I mean, it's not that necessarily that didn't happen. We need to remain open to all of this stuff, but it also needs to be fact-based. We can't just, make up stories for ourselves to believe, as we said before,
That's what I say. I may well have happened.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it didn't, but you're saying it did.
Right.
That's the difference. You know
right,
I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. You have a dog in this fight, whereas I'm just sort of trying to remain impartial until there's enough evidence.
I'm just watching.
Right.
Yeah.
Like one specific example that both Ian and I know about, while going through the EdFu text, there's an author that will remain unnamed, but he went over the EdFu text and also talked about the sound eye, but he seemed to get a lot more information about it than was actually in the source text. And so we went and read the entire thing, couldn't find half of the stuff that was quoted. And so it's one of those things, again, where even people who have many, many good points, if they want to sensationalize the subject, they're going to discredit the entire thing for anyone who has half a minute to go through their work.
Yeah.
And it actually discredits the field once again, and that's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's because once you're to feel like that, it's so easy for them to do it too, just taboo it, because they can sensationalize it so much. And even the people that they can employ the work of inepts as well as adepts.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's their game.
Yeah. And that's a good way of putting it, I think. I mean, as Matt was just saying, I mean, we, in doing research for all of this, we use, unorthodox sources like Hancock and Andrew Collins and Zechariah Sitchin if it's demonstrable. I mean, if it's verifiable evidence that he's presenting, yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately, there are some authors, especially in this field, that that just flat out make shit up, and they source, and they put a source. They may put a source, they may not, whatever. But I mean, they're sort of counting on the fact that no one's going to do their homework and check out what they're saying, and that in and of itself is kind of indicative of the state of our society right now. I mean, we're happy to just see it in print. It doesn't really matter if there's any evidence to back it up.
That's exactly what I'm saying. More than less is that all of these things come down to verifiable. Anything that we are searching for needs to be verified in one manner or another. It doesn't necessarily have to be printed. It could be even from a shaman themselves if they are a source. But what I'm finding is that a lot of people are putting too many spins on these things, and it's taking, once again, the credibility out of these subjects. And a beautiful thing is, once again, you had previously mentioned in the past year, this thing seems to have really accelerated, and there are a lot of new branches of this research coming out to the forefront, and it's helping us with our research, and I believe that's once again helping them. The more we can do for this, the more we can spread these concepts and ideas that have been on the back burner for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, just to get back to what we were saying a little earlier, the idea of so many large sections of mythology and archaeology just sort of going unexplored. Matt and I spent about a month in Mexico doing research into the acoustic properties of these various temples, and one thing that we both noticed was that when you stood on top of, for instance, in Uxmal in Mexico, you stand on top of the governor's palace, and you can see out and into the jungle, and you see coming up through all of these trees these just mounds of rubble that are clearly pyramids, clearly ruins that just haven't been investigated, and no one really gives a shit about them. And still, when you read books about places like Uxmal, it's as though everything's settled. It's an open and shut case.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, he's completely right about that, and most of these sites are of that exact same. They're all sitting there, mostly unexplored, and all of these people take into account that they know everything about the site, and it's cut and dry, it's printed, and people leave it alone for 30, 40 years, and someone comes along and says, hey, 90% of this entire excavational site is undone. Why haven't we tampered with this yet? And it's because of finances. And this stuff isn't really fascinating to the mass consensus, and so it's really hard to get financing for a lot of these archaeological works, which is pretty unfortunate.
Yeah.
But we really don't know everything that's left out there. You had previously mentioned the island to the west of Ireland, and in Graham Hancock's Underworld, he went over the last glacial maximum and how there was something like 1 million square miles of land that was previously above water that is now inundated. And seeing as human societies like to be near water, there's a high probability that there are a lot of societies that we have never even heard of yet that are still underwater.
No doubt. There seems to be a hell of a lot of interest by a lot of militaries in Antarctica, which has been underwater, or ice for that matter, for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Or more.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, that's one of the sort of, I guess you could say, benefits to the melting of the ice caps. I mean, it's suddenly we're having all of these lands revealed that for thousands of years have just been under miles of ice. So it's going to be interesting, especially in the next few years, if we make it, to see what turns up. So yeah.
Even Yonaguni or them islands, islands that have always been up that we just never went to because we never figured that they meant anything.
Right.
Like even Hawaii has a lot of stuff that's just unexplored. You know what I mean?
Ruins in Cuba.
You brought up, what was that big one called? Remember that video you sent?
Mirador.
El Mirador or something like that?
Yeah, El Mirador, the lost.
Belize, but it was just huge. It was all jungle, but it was just immense. This pyramid, El Mirador. Isn't that what it was called?
Yeah, El Mirador. And I haven't.
Belize, just a small Central American government, no money.
Sure.
Like, who's gonna pay for that excavation?
Yeah.
Way the hell out in the middle of the jungle.
Some people taped it out in the middle of the jungle, and then it was. I heard a bit of it, and all the information you can find is from 2006. After that, there's nothing.
Right.
Yeah, and that's another thing that happens. Remember all that shit that they found off the coast of Cuba? Oh, there's pyramids under the water, and then all of a sudden, you hear nothing. And the investigation just stops.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, the thing is, I'm not sure it takes any kind of global conspiracy. What I always come down to with conspiracy theories is that really, I mean, what's a conspiracy? It's men deciding on what would be in their best interest to pursue and not pursue. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I mean, it's really human nature. If you have underwater settlements off the coast of Cuba or El Mirador in Guatemala that seem to fly in the face of the academic establishment, and it's the responsibility of the academic establishment to explore it, I mean, they're not going to. Why the fuck would they? I mean, you know, I mean, they might, but not, you know, there's going to be no rush. Let's put it that way. You know what I mean?
If they can't find a way to profit from it,
yeah,
they're
right,
not going to
exactly.
bother doing.
Exactly.
Which, once again, you get to the point of sensationalism.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you'll distort facts. And a lot of problems with these things are, if they are a fringe topic, a lot of these people who would have some kind of claim to the subject won't actually risk their credentials. Because if it's a fringe topic and these people have a PhD in their respective field, and they know that everybody around them is going to chastise them for doing this, they'll be kicked out of their committee, and once again, it'll be bad for their career.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to find people who are willing to, you know, have some guts or put their job on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like Robert Bauval. I mean, he was in that situation when he, or not Robert Bauval, I'm sorry, Robert Schoch, when he lent his expertise to John Anthony West in terms of redating the Sphinx. I mean, there was a concerted effort at Boston University to kick him out. It's the same way with John Mack, you know, the UFO researcher. He was a professor at Harvard, and he decided to start taking seriously some of these people's claims and looking into it from sort of an impartial perspective. And the minute he published his findings, I mean, he was the subject of a witch hunt. He was almost fired. So, you know.
There's a case of Virginia Steen Madsen too.
Yeah, right, exactly, yes.
She was brought in. She wasn't trying to prove any point. She was brought in by these people.
Yeah,
and then she dated it,
and she reported her findings.
She's an expert in her field or whatever. She didn't know anything about the actual dig or the archaeology of or whatever. That's not her job. Right. She came in, she dated the artifact, she gave them the number, and they said, no, you're wrong. Mm-hmm. So she said, oh yeah, I'll date it again. So she dated it again, gave them 4 different dating methods. They said, all of these are wrong and you're fired. What?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing, and it's transparent, and that's the craziest part, is that when you spend 5 minutes looking into this, I mean, the bias is clear. But most of this doesn't get to the general public, unfortunately. They just read the textbooks that were published by the winners, you know.
Yeah, history is written by the victors.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's Napoleonic.
Yep.
Winston Churchill said something similar too. Somebody said, "How do you think you'll go down in history?" And he said, "Well, I'll go down fine because I intend to write it."
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, you know, it's actually kind of a frightening thing, which is why I think when we as independent researchers explore mankind's history, we have to do it delicately in some sense, because it's too precious of a thing to just make outlandish claims about in order to turn a profit. I mean, you know, if we're interested in truth, then we have to be careful with that truth. You know what I mean? We have to make sure that what we say is evidence-based, is verifiable, is based on, you know, not just a hunch or bullshit.
All right, well, I guess we're gonna wrap this up. So if you want to give everybody your website and how to get copies of your work and stuff.
Sure.
Drop some links.
Yeah, we don't really have a set website. We're all over Facebook. We have a group called Ancient Mysteries and Forgotten History, which anyone can. I think that's facebook.com/Ancient Histories Mysteries. And then there's our site for our Atlantis book, and that's on Facebook as well. Just look up Atlantis Egyptian Genesis. I'm on there. Matt's on there. If anyone has any questions, and of course both of our books, In the Beginning and Atlantis Egyptian Genesis, are both available on Amazon.com.
How long till you the next part for the Kindle?
Good question. I'm writing a thing now, another book now on on the Nephilim and that whole idea. So it might be a little bit, but hopefully we can put something together, get it out within a few months.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you guys both for coming on.
Thank you guys for having us.
Yeah.
Excellent chat, man. Covered a lot of stuff, so
A lot of fun.
I'm happy with that. Hope to have you back sometime, and good luck in your future affairs, man.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
You too.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. Come back anytime. And thanks again, Ian
All right,
Driscoll, Matt Kurtz, Atlantis, Egyptian Genesis. Check it out. You can get it on Amazon.
Yeah,
Anyway,
thanks.
this has been Truenorth. Up next is something. Have fun. See you guys later. I'm out.
What you want? What you want? Come on. What you want? Come on. What you want? Come on.
Hey everyone, this is Dan Dix from Press for Truth, and you are listening to freethinkradio.com. Be sure to check back in for all the latest news, views, and interviews from the good folks right here at Free Think Radio.